welcome to episode 281 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Professor Alan McKinnon, Professor of Logistics at Kuehne Logistics University, draws upon his decades of experience and research to share 5 strategies to decarbonise urban logistics. Before we get to Professor Alan McKinnon and his strategies to decarbonise urban logistics, a quick word about Parcel and Post Expo. It's coming up in Frankfurt this year from the 18th to the 20th of October. It's going to be a great event, more exhibitors than ever before apparently, and it's free to enter the expo. So you can register at parcelandpostexpo.com and you'll be able to follow the links there to look at the program, the list of exhibitors, and register there. So I'm going to be there. Marek Krzyzewski, my co-host from The Last Mile Profits, he's going to be there too. Maybe we'll have a chance to meet up. So, Parcel and Post Expo 2021 being held in Frankfurt this October. Look forward to seeing you there. Joining me is Professor Alan McKinnon. He's a Professor of Logistics, currently part-time Professor at Kuehne Logistics University in Hamburg. Alan, welcome. We're going to talk about, we're coming back to the topic of decarbonising urban logistics. Before we get stuck into things, Alan, do you just want to share a little bit about your background and some of the research you've done over the past couple of decades?
So I'm Alan McKinnon. I've been an academic working in logistics now for over 40 years. But for the past 15 to 20 years, much of my research has focused on the decarbonisation of logistics.
So Alan, let's get into the meat of this discussion, which is about, we just said, decarbonising urban logistics. And you've come up with a list of 5 strategies. So we might just go through them just one by one and making them relevant to the last mile. So what's your first area or the first point that you have when it comes to these strategies to reduce emissions?
Okay, yeah. So I published a book in 2018 on the decarbonisation of logistics, and that's structured around these what I call 5 decarbonisation levers. Right. So the first one is where we try just to reduce the demand for logistics, reduce the distance that freight vehicles have to travel, for example. We could also even look beyond the transport sector at just how we reduce the amount of stuff that needs to be moved. Right, and that can be done in various ways. We can make products smaller and lighter. We can improve recycling of products. We can apply the principles of the circular economy. But if we just focus on what we can do to reduce the amount of transport within an urban area, we could use land use policy. We could redistribute land uses, the origins and destinations of freight to minimize the distance traveled. But that would take time, and that's a fairly radical proposal. What we can do in the interim is just route the vehicles more efficiently between the points of origin and destination. And that doesn't necessarily mean reducing the distance always. I mean, if we're aiming to cut carbon emissions, sometimes that might involve the vehicle following a more circuitous route to avoid stretches of congested road, for example. But there's potential, I think, to apply computerized vehicle routing systems to reduce the distance that vehicles travel.
So route optimization plays a key role then. What about changing modes? Is that another strategy?
It is. Well, if one looks at how we decarbonize inter-urban transport, freight transport at a higher geographical scale, a lot of focus there is on shifting freight from road to rail, or perhaps in some cases to waterways. But rail transport and and waterway transport are essentially long-haul transport modes. In urban areas, the journey length is relatively short, and so it doesn't offer the same potential for modal shift. I think the best example, however, in recent years of modal shift at the urban scale has been the move to cargo cycles. Getting freight out of conventional motorized vans and using pedal power, if you like, to deliver goods within urban areas. And I think there's significant potential to extend that, and that offers a significant carbon benefit. Interesting research been done in Portugal for this, on this example, just to see to what extent the shift to cargo cycles can actually decarbonize last mile delivery. And in the future, modal shift, some people think in terms of shifting freight to drones or surface delivery robots that would be
Careful,
battery
Alan, with
powered.
mentioning drones.
I know. Oh yes, I mean, I might also be regarded as a drone skeptic in that respect. I don't see drones being used as a mass means of parcel delivery in urban areas. They may have sort of niche applications, but so that possibly future modal shift to these autonomous means of delivery, I don't think will have a much of an impact on decarbonisation.
And in some respects, it's a pity that we're not yet at a point where, say, ground-based autonomous vehicles can be more efficient or more effective, because if they were able to run at night, for example, when there's less traffic on the road, it would make sense because, well, let's be honest, our human drivers don't really want to be out there delivering 100 packages after dark for safety reasons, for various other reasons. So anyway, how about I don't go down that rabbit hole, Alan? We'll stick
Okay.
to the points here. Well, so just returning to these five principles that you've identified. The next one that I understand is about making more efficient use of the vehicles that you have.
That's right, yes. Improving the load factors of the vehicles, because if we did that, we could then reduce vehicle kilometres, and there would be both fuel and CO2 benefits in that. And the data that we have suggests that a lot of urban freight vehicles are underused. And there have been many efforts over decades, to try to improve the utilisation of urban freight vehicles. One of the first proposals was to establish consolidation centres on the outskirts of towns, where you would consolidate deliveries, mainly going to shops within the inner urban area. But the same principle could be applied to online deliveries on the last mile. I mentioned the use of cargo cycles. So we're needing a new sort of logistical infrastructure in many cities to support cargo cycle logistics, with the creation of micro hubs, for example. So again, you could use out-of-town consolidation centres to feed product into these micro hubs. That would also help to improve the loading of vehicles. Another thing that we could do is encourage parcel carriers in urban areas to pool their resources, to share their assets. And there have been various efforts over the years to achieve that. There's an obvious reluctance, I think, on the part of the bigger parcel carriers to do that. They've made substantial investments in their depots and in their vehicle fleets, and they obviously want to maximize the throughput. And so one can understand why there's some resistance. But I would have thought through time there may be more effort made to share vehicles and thereby improve the average load factors.
Have you any examples of where a collaboration between carriers has worked?
The main examples are not so much at the urban scale. They are at the inter-urban area. There was an EU project called CO3, which I contributed to some years ago, which developed a number of pilots with companies, and they were analysed just to demonstrate what the economic and environmental benefits would be of companies sharing their vehicles. One of the most celebrated brought together Nestle and United Biscuits here in the UK, where I live at the moment. Also, in the Benelux countries, Nestle collaborated with PepsiCo to share their vehicles. And that demonstrated very clearly that there are CO2 benefits and economic benefits from doing that. There are fewer examples of that at the urban scale and on the last mile. So the hope would be that what has been demonstrated on interurban transport might now be applied in practice within urban areas.
There is a reluctance, as you hinted at, on the part of last mile carriers to collaborate when it comes to delivering the final product to the recipient, whether it's B2B or B2C. How could it work? I mean, is it something that has to be mandated by, say, a city council or by a region, or is it something that can be achieved through genuine collaboration? What are your thoughts there?
I think it unlikely that it would be enforced by regulation. I think that would be felt to be intruding on what is a sort of free market operation. One way in which it might happen initially is a sharing of locker banks. for example, at the front end of the online retail supply chain, because that's another form of consolidation and another way of improving utilization of the vehicles, where they don't deliver to the home, but they deliver to locker banks in the vicinity of a neighborhood. And perhaps we could see maybe greater sharing of the locker banks by different parcel carriers, because and then maybe once, if collaboration is established at that level, it might then could be extended into other areas as well.
Another thing I wanted to ask about, Alan, was this idea of the physical internet. I've read a little bit about it lately. I'm intrigued by this and how it could work for the delivery world. What can you share there?
Okay, so the physical internet, if it was applied in practice, would involve applying the principles of the digital internet in the physical world of logistics. So that would involve establishing open systems, much greater sharing of logistics assets, that's the vehicles as well as the depots, decentralized control, a sort of remodularisation of freight movements with different standard modules being used. Very fashionable concept, much researched. The main applications have been considered at an inter-urban level, at a larger spatial scale, but there have been some journal papers published by academics looking at how we could apply the principles of the physical internet at the urban level. There was one paper that said the physical internet may allow us to develop what they call a hyper-connected city logistics system. But this is a very radical proposal, and those people who advocate it concede that it's going to take time to develop. It could well be into the late 2030s or 2040s before we actually see this develop in practice. There are also disputes over the migration path from the current way in which we manage logistics to this future physical distribution world. However, the modelling that's been done suggests that if it could be developed in practice, then there would be significant CO2 emissions from that. There would be economic as well as environmental benefits. It's a concept that has been adopted by the European Technology Platform for Logistics, an organization called ALICE. So it's certainly worth investigating, but unfortunately, it's not going to deliver large CO2 emissions in the near future, certainly not on the last mile.
Well, let's return to something a little bit more concrete then. Let's talk about the energy efficiency of the vehicles that we currently have out there on the road. How can we improve the energy efficiency of our delivery vehicles?
Okay, if we're looking to improve the energy efficiency of last mile logistics, one thing that will help is regulation, because here in Europe, we now have fuel economy standards for new vans and new trucks. In the case of vans, that will see the fuel efficiency rise by 30% by 2021 through to 2030. In the case of trucks, again, between 2019 and 2030, there will be about a 30% improvement in fuel efficiency. But that's just for new vehicles. And so it will take time for these new, more fuel efficient vehicles to be adopted in this sector. There are other things we can do in the meantime. We can retrofit some of the existing vehicles. We can improve their aerodynamics, though because freight vehicles in urban areas don't travel very quickly, you don't get the full benefits of aerodynamic improvement. We can put anti-idling devices on the vehicles. One of the main things we can do is train the drivers to drive more fuel efficiently, to train the drivers and then use telematics to monitor the way in which the vehicles are being driven, and where necessary, give the drivers additional training and guidance. That's been shown to be one of the most cost-effective ways of decarbonising logistics operations, but both at the urban level and also on inter-urban journeys.
Alan, what about the time of day that the deliveries take place? I mean, if you've got someone delivering in, say, tropical Queensland with the air conditioning on full in the middle of the day compared to delivering in the cooler hours of the day, or am I making that up, or is that a real thing?
No, what you're saying makes a great deal of sense. If you can reschedule urban deliveries into the evening or during the night when traffic levels are much lower, the vehicles can travel closer to their most fuel-efficient speed, and that can translate into a reduction in carbon emissions. Again, there have been trial schemes around the world, and they have demonstrated that there are economic and environmental benefits from doing that. There are some constraints to be overcome, obviously. I mean, then drivers have to work through the night. You also have to find ways of delivering to premises when they're closed. So we get into the realms of what they call unattended delivery. But research done in cities like New York, Bogota, Sao Paulo, and so forth have shown that this is quite an effective way of improving the energy efficiency of city logistics operations.
And do we need to worry about energy efficiency if we just move to electric vehicles, though?
Yes, I think we still do, because, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a slow transition to lower carbon vehicles. That transition is going to be quicker for vans than it's going to be for bigger and heavier vehicles. But it could be well into the 2030s before we see a substantial number of these vehicles being powered by batteries or fuel cells or whatever. And therefore, in the meantime, we have to focus on energy efficiency. But even once we have this new generation of low carbon vehicles, they will also have to be driven fuel efficiently or energy efficiently, because, low carbon electricity is going to be a precious commodity, and we're going to have to use it in a very careful way. And so I think it'd be quite wrong to suggest that once we switch to battery powered vehicles, for example, that we should attach less importance to improving energy efficiency.
Well, let's talk about that now then. Let's talk about the switch to the moving away from the internal combustion engine to these low carbon delivery modes. What are your observations there of this as a decarbonisation strategy?
Well, this is the main way in which we will get down to zero emissions. All right. The other measures will help to get us there, but it's only when we switch to, I think, battery-powered vehicles on the last mile, because we've seen huge improvements in battery technology. The energy density has improved, the storage capacity, but also the cost of batteries has fallen really quite dramatically over the past 10 years. So I think that on the last mile, vehicles will be powered by batteries, and not just vans. I mean, also the cargo cycles. I think their payloads will increase, and so more and more of them will become electrically powered or assisted as well. Some people suggest that maybe hydrogen can make a contribution. I'm very doubtful of that at this scale. I think we will need the green hydrogen to decarbonise other hard-to-abate transport modes like shipping and aviation. And I see it's batteries that will predominantly decarbonise city logistics.
When it comes to electric vehicles in general, there's the pushback has been recently not just about the total cost of ownership, but also about how much you have to use an electric vehicle to make it better overall for the environment, however you want to quantify that, compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle, because of all of the costs in extracting the battery materials from the earth and all of that. Do you have any observations on that, Alan?
Well, there's an issue there which I feel quite strongly about. I mean, you mentioned battery resources because there's concern about the future supplies, not so much of the lithium for the batteries, I think but cobalt, for example, which we need for the cathode and the anode, and also the rare earths. And that may constrain the transition to low carbon vehicles. And again, if our objective is to maximize the rate at which we decarbonize transport, what we want to do is to use these scarce battery materials as intensively as possible. And I mean, freight vehicles, that's the bigger trucks as well as the vans, are very intensively used. So if we use the relatively scarce materials in these batteries, we'll get a much bigger carbon reduction than we will if we use it in private cars. right? Now, I drive an electric car myself, and I have to say I feel guilty that my car sits in the driveway or in parking slots for so much of its time. The average car is only used for, 5 or 6% of the time in the day, right? So we've a lot of these valuable battery materials lying there, largely unused for most of the time. So I would like us, until we get a bigger supply of these battery materials, to see them used more for commercial vehicles so that we get them used more intensively and we get a bigger carbon benefit from doing that.
Alan, I know that this is a little bit outside of sort of the delivery world, and somebody might be yelling at you, stay in your lane or something like that. But how much does consumption by consumers, businesses, etc., drive the emissions that we generate in the last mile? And is there anything we can do about it?
Yes, I think as we move into a low carbon world, patterns of consumption will have to change. Now, I don't want to discuss how much people buy. That's a separate issue. If we just focus on the logistics of this, what has happened recently is that the e-tailers, the online retailers, have been differentiating their services by speed of delivery, for example. They're desperate to capture market share, and so they're offering people faster delivery. A lot of goods now delivered next day or even same day delivery, right? And there's a penalty associated with that. It means you can't achieve the same vehicle load factors. There's a carbon penalty associated with that. They're also they're making it easier for consumers to return products free of charge. Can be done easily. And consumers are, I think, beginning to abuse that level of logistical support on the last mile, right? Some consumers are now almost trying to recreate the shop in their homes, where they're ordering multiple products, trying them on, and then sending most of them back, right? There's been reference in the press recently to what they call a tsunami of returns in the online retail sector. This just cannot continue. It economically doesn't make sense, but it carries a very strong environmental penalty. But unfortunately, consumers have been conditioned to expect this. And the challenge will now be, in a sense, to re-educate consumers, or maybe use the price mechanism to enforce higher standards of sustainability in the way that we deliver products to consumers.
There's plenty for us to ponder there, Alan. If people want to find out more about your research and the work that you've been doing over the past decades, where should they go?
An obvious place to go would be my personal website, which is www.alanmckinnon.co.uk, where I have put about 40 years of my research on this subject area. So I think that would be a good place to start.
alanmckinnon.co.uk. There you have it. That's the web address to go to. I'll stick a link to it on the Postal Hub as well if you're out walking the dog and you haven't been able to write it down. But if people walk their cats, if you're out walking your cat or your iguana, I don't know, you could be. Don't tell me if you are. I'm not sure. It could change our relationship. I'll stick a link there on the Postal Hub website anyway so you can find it when you're back from walking your iguana. Professor Alan McKinnon, Professor of Logistics at Kuehne Logistics University in Hamburg and all-round expert on decarbonising logistics. Thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
It's been my pleasure, Ian. Thank you very much.
Next week on the Postal Hub podcast, Karen Ann Allen from DPD Group joins me to talk about DPD Group's ambitious net carbon zero target and the strategies they are deploying to achieve that goal. Make sure you catch that episode next week. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you like. Leave a rating and a review. That'd be awesome. 5 out of 5 would be the best. Please, just take a moment to give us a rating on the various podcast platforms. Really helps. Thank you, or thanks in advance, I suppose I should say. Head on over to thepostalhub.com, though, if you want to sign up for some emails. My regular email newsletter, which promotes each episode and any other articles I've written, is there, as well as the Daily Delivery Digest. Head on over to thepostalhub.com and find out more there. I'm on LinkedIn. Following on LinkedIn, it's just good for the soul. Oh, maybe not. I should add a disclaimer to that. It's not good for the soul if you're a drone delivery enthusiast, I suppose. Anyway, if you want to contact me about anything at all, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.